It's been a quiet offseason for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Did they do enough to keep themselves at Cup contender status? That's what we'll talk about today on the Locked On Lightning podcast.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Lightning fans, thank you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen of the day. Every single day, we are your free daily Tampa Bay Lightning podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, want to start off by shouting out our everydayers, the fans who tune into every single show. We appreciate the love and support you give us each and every day. You're seeing and listening to two new voices today. This is the first Locked On Lightning with the brand new co-host team. I'm Nick Morgan. I am joined by the Nikita Kucherov, to my Braden Point, Greg Steven. Greg, welcome in.
Welcome, Nick. It's going to be a great time. I'm so excited. We have so much to talk about starting off, just like in this off season. Not too much going on, but there's still a lot to chat about.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that said like boring in terms of this offseason. I kind of vehemently disagree. I think there is a lot to discuss, and that includes maybe some of the moves they didn't make. That's all the stuff that we're going to be talking about on today's show. We're including some of the best offseason moves of the Lightning did make. I think Greg even wants to shout out somebody they didn't re-sign as maybe the offseason moves. I assume, Greg, Lightning fans are going to know who you're talking about.
We'll see, but I would guess they also are in agreement with me that, maybe we should not have re-signed Nick Perbix. And as we've seen, he is departed.
Yeah, Barry Trotz in Nashville will disagree. We'll talk about that quote in a little bit too. Plus, is there still more work to be done? Does there need to be another move that the Lightning make out there? All that coming up on today's show. But first, the $1 million question: are the Lightning still a cup contender? That's been sort of the topic of discussion around the NHL in this sort of off-season media cycle. And a lot of people point to Tampa Bay's what they call quiet off-season. And it's kind of an interesting question, Greg, because going in, I don't think anybody was expecting a big offseason for the Lightning. They didn't have that much cap space. They were linked to some names, but I don't think it was ever a situation in which you were like, oh, the Lightning are going to be massive players this year.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And, it's difficult to do a lot with so little money, right? And what they have done, I think, is what they could have done so far in the summer, given, again, the money. And so far, we haven't even reached the season yet, right? And a lot of the bigger moves can be made during the season. As far as your original question, are the Lightning a cup contender? I would say yes, I think they are. I think there are things that need to change in order for that to remain true. And I think this past season, we saw a lot of the analysts put them beating the Panthers in the first round, right? And
I thought so too. I thought that was my pick.
Me too. And obviously biased to some extent as a fan, right? But, I did expect them to at least put up a better fight than what they did. And I think we can discuss what we really thought went wrong as well. I think that's a big part of, are they still a cup contender? Because you do need to get through the Florida Panthers to be a cup contender.
Yeah. And I have something in my best offseason moves that I think is going to compound, I think, maybe one of the biggest problems in that Panthers series, which was depth. And we'll talk about it in a second. But I just look at how the Lightning are made up, Greg. And it's that top six is still, I would say, one of the best top six units in the NHL. I mean, I wouldn't say they're the best, but I think in terms of quality and the depth of scoring that you get, not from Nikita Kucherov, who's still an elite scoring winger, but also Brandon Hagel this past year. I think we've seen some big strides from Braden Point, kind of becoming that more consistent number one center now that Stamkos is in greener pastures, green in terms of money. I think, you still have Andrei Vasilevskiy, even though I think there's maybe not as elite of a goalie that he was a couple years ago during that cup run where he was clearly the best goalie in the world, but still in the NHL's top echelon. You have Victor Hedman, who's still very much, I think, in playing like he's in his prime. Those are three elements: a firestorm top six, an elite number one defenseman, and a top tier goalie that the good Stanley Cup teams have. And Tampa still has it. And yeah, there's going to be some roster shuffling, especially I think kind of as you get more towards the outer realms of the team's depth. But, this is still the core of the team pretty much in their prime that won 2 Stanley Cups a couple of years ago.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think as far as core goes, the Lightning have arguably one of the best, right? I would say maybe the best. Outside of potentially the Panthers, they made some great moves this offseason. But the Lightning, like you said, they're sitting on a strong core. And while they are aging, they're their early 30s, those core guys you listed, they still have the production in them. And we've seen that from Kuch, right? He's still dropping 100 points a season right now. Mm-hmm. And I do expect that to drop off in the next 3-ish years, right? I wouldn't even be surprised if he doesn't put up 100 this coming season. Do I think he will? I do. Now, going to the depth, like you had said, you need the depth to win the NHL. You need it. And I think some of the moves they've made so far have been a step in the right direction, and some, we can talk about further. Mm-hmm. But as far as you said, the core is there, and I think with the right retooling, they are definitely a contender.
Yeah. What do you think about the team's defense right now? Because I think when people talk about whether Tampa Bay is a cup contender or not, it's they always point to the defense. It's like, there's Hedman, top tier, a little bit low is JJ Moser, and then just a cavalcade of hilarity behind them, featuring Eric Chernak.
Right. And, I actually love Eric Chernak. I'm glad you mentioned him. I think since he had an injury, I want to say it was 2 seasons ago in the playoffs, he took a cheap shot up to the head. And in my opinion, ever since that hit, he really hasn't been the aggressor that he used to be. He still plays strong defense, and he is a bit more physical as some of the other defense on the Lightning. But you have seen him take a little bit of that grit off his game, and I do wonder if it's due to injury. Outside of Chernak and Hedman, as you've named, and JJ, I do think some of the younger guys looked better this season. I think there's significant room for improvement in many areas, right? I think one of the biggest issues with the Lightning defense right now is just positional play. They seem like they're lost a lot. And I do think that Blashill was a big part of that. And again, that's speculation, but he's gone now. So we'll see this season with a new assistant there, how that's going to function, right?
Yeah.
So
they bring in Dan Highnote, who I think a lot of Predators fans, as people know, I used to cover Locked On Predators. I could probably tell you a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of what Dan Highnote can bring. There's a lot of positives. He's also taken his fair share of criticism when he was in Nashville. So interesting to see what he can bring. To me, it is just, and maybe this is the hot take, but do you remember when when Toronto kept losing to Boston, and then they would have all those offseason moves that's our goals to get past Boston. This is our white whale. Does it feel like Florida's kind of that for the Lightning right now? Does it feel like that's maybe the first step where it's okay, how can we match up against the 2-time defending cup champions? And then after that, we'll see where we stand in the rest of the Eastern Conference. Is that kind of the first step for you?
I think so, especially given what Florida has done in this offseason. They're just going to be the same juggernaut, right? They're going to run it back again, and rightfully so. And I think that entire, I would say the entire conference is the goal, right? You got to get through the Panthers. And look, you got McDavid probably waiting on the other side after them, but ultimately you got to get through the Panthers. And I think you're right. I think they are like that white whale, not just to the Lightning, but to many of the teams in the East. But I do think the Lightning, if they want to beat the Panthers, there are some big changes they need to make to their game specifically. I think one of those big factors is physicality, and they got bullied this past season, right? They did. And if you're not going to bring a physical presence and dominate on the physical part of the game, you're just not going to beat the Panthers. And that's an area right now the Lightning still lack, right?
Yeah, maybe, because we're going to be talking about an offseason edition that I think maybe, Greg, adds a little bit of sandpaper in the depth part, like you were talking about, adds a little bit of physicality. We're going to talk about him and some of the other best offseason moves for the Lightning this year coming up in just 1 second. Want to mention today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging onto your computer early and waiting forever for those concert tickets to drop, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. It is every music fan's worst nightmare. Music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever, and prices actually drop as you get closer to showtime, which means you can save up to 60% off with killer last minute deals. And if you're tired of the endless scrolling, if you're like me, if you have decision fatigue and you keep jumping between sections and trying to find the best price, Game Time takes that out. They have a zone deal, which helps you automatically find the best price in the best section for what you're looking for. And with Game Time, this is my favorite part, the price you see is the price you pay. There's not all those hidden fees or extra payments like some of those other, ticket apps or whatever you have. Game Time shows you the price up front so you can budget and plan perfectly. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the first episode of the revamped Locked On Lightning podcast. We teased it right before the break, but a couple of big moves that were, I would say, under the radar, Greg, but I think paid big dividends for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So let's kind of go through what has been a quote-unquote quiet offseason for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Well, one of the biggest deals, Pontus Holmberg, 26-year-old forward, signing a 2-year deal. Coming over from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Just 19 points in 68 games with the Maple Leafs this year. We also had an assist in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Not sexy on the stat line, but a lot of Tampa Bay fans are loving the depth he brings, a lot of physicality. A lot of people say he's a perfect bottom six player. You also have Jakob Pelletier, who is a 24-year-old, signed a 3-year contract with the Lightning this past year from the Philadelphia Flyers. At one point, I would say maybe one of the Flames' top prospects, just hasn't quite figured it out on the NHL level there, but there's some potential there. And then the other one is the legend returns. Tampa Bay Lightning legend Boris Katchouk coming back. Florida, you're not the only one with a Katchouk. We've got one now. He comes back. Two-year could be a AHL level deal, but he could fight for a, I guess, one of those like depth spots, extra forward spots. Yeah. So in terms of additions, Greg, how are you feeling about those 3 names I just mentioned?
I think given the money the Lightning did have to spend so far in this offseason, I would say fine moves. I don't think any of these players is going to make or break how the Lightning perform in the postseason necessarily. As far as preferring the signings, I think Holmberg is one of the better ones. I do agree with, I think, what you had said, where a lot of people view him as a strong bottom six forward. And I think that's accurate. I think that's fair to say. I don't think he was given a ton of time when he was up in Toronto, right? Which is justified. They also have a very strong core, right? So expecting him to see 20 minutes of ice time is unrealistic. But expecting him to play maybe, 10 to 15 minutes, I think is fairly reasonable. I also think he is one of those guys that you see the effort level in all his shifts. And I think that's very important in hockey. You want a guy that's going to go out there and give you 100% every single shift, not just on the shifts that he thinks he's going to make a difference, right? So I think that's very important to the Lightning. One signing I do enjoy that I think we missed was Gage is coming back as well. Gage Goncalves.
Yes. Gage
And
Goncalves.
I actually would say that is my favorite move so far. Gage looked absolutely incredible in the second half of the season. He was just remarkable. And in the postseason, he put up 4 points in 5 games. And I think Kuch had also put up 4 points in 5 games. So look, he's not Kucherov, but I mean, the kid did his job, right? And he did it well. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Gage does. He looked like he really settled in through the second half.
Yeah, I want to touch on him in a little bit because I think it's fair to say, Greg, if you're looking at somebody on this roster that you look and say breakout candidate right there, like that's somebody who's, I think, ready to take a next step. It would be Gage, overage Gage, right? Because you mentioned it. He played so well, I think, with some of the Lightning's bigger guns, opposite Brandon Hagel. I know both Nick Paul and Anthony Cirelli had sort of time in that middle of the lineup as that number 2 center last year, but he fit in so well with both of them. And for a team like the Lightning, where there's so much talent, part of your success is just going to be how you gel with some of those bigger names. And I think a lot of people, when Gage kind of got shuffled up to a top 6 role last year, maybe rightfully skeptical, but he proved he can handle it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, he, like you said, he's going to take a big step forward this season, I think. And I think we're going to see him play a lot more minutes too. And I look forward to it because I think he is going to establish himself as a more reliable forward for the team. And that's great because he's young, and assuming he sticks around, he's great for the future as well.
Yeah, and you need those guys too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think especially as you kind of come into this situation that we did this offseason where it was, 3.4, 3.5 in cap space or something like that.
Right.
When you have as much of the roster locked up long-term as JVB does, you're going to have to find guys kind of organically like they have with Gage. And you're going to have to find guys that are ready to sort of step up and take that next role. Kind of like Nick Paul was when they got him for the Senators, was kind of just sort of that bottom guy, has sort of elevated his game into being somebody who can really play strong in that middle 6. Just like, when, Steven Stamkos was hurt during those 2 cup years, that's when Braden Point really took the next step. That's when Anthony Cirelli really took the next step. I'm looking for Gage to maybe be that guy this year, but I want to backtrack a little bit. I want to talk more about Pontus Holmberg because to me, that I think is sort of the underrated new addition of the year for me. And you kind of mentioned it when they lost to the Panthers last year in the first round. The biggest criticism was they were getting outplayed physically, and it sort of looks like they just kind of ran out of steam. Somebody on Reddit sort of joked, and it's like, oh my God, a bottom 6 signing who's under 30 years old. Is JBB okay, man? But one Toronto fan chimed in on Reddit to kind of sum this up and just said, Lightning fans, you're going to love this guy. He's a Swiss Army knife. Right. And he is, he's somebody that I think is sort of a chameleon how he plays. He's going to be a 4th line guy slotted in. He's going to physical. He's going to forecheck. He's going to win a lot of loose pucks. He's going to be the guy that Lightning kind of put out there for minutes. And with the mantra of just don't screw anything up. And I don't mean that in a bad thing. I think you need players like that on your team. But I also think like, hey, there's an injury up front. Somebody's out. He's somebody that I think can go in there and kind of be like the quasi fill-in and just kind of give a physical presence to, I'm just spitballing here, like, alongside Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov, just sort of be like the grinder that just kind of opens up space for them if there's an injury or, Gensel gets shuffled around, whatever that situation may be. That's a guy that I think is going to be a big piece for the Lightning this year.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think like what you're saying all comes down to effort level. And like you said, if he needs to fill a role where he needs to retrieve pucks, he's going to do it. If he needs to go out there and forecheck hard, he's going to do it. And I think, like you said, the word chameleon, I think that's a great descriptor for him. He's a guy that can fill in a lot of different roles when needed. And I think, look, the Lightning have been known to develop players excellently, right? We've seen it happen over the last decade.
Right.
And not that he has some experience under his belt too, right? He's not like a fresh guy coming in by any means, but there is still room for him to grow. And I think this is a great organization for him to develop even further. And, ideally he ships up to be like a Gage almost, and he kind of takes that next step with Gage. It'd be awesome to see.
Yeah. Two quick transactions we didn't really mention. That's coming up in just a second. One is the Isaac Howard deal. Greg, I know you have some thoughts on that. And is there any sort of, I already know the answer, but I'm going to tease it anyway, Greg. Is there any sort of regret of not bringing Nick Perbix back for any deal? Plus, we'll mention one move that we think the Lightning still have to make. That's coming up when we come back on Locked on Lightning. All right, we're back on Locked on Lightning. Greg, a couple of quick offseason transactions that I want to touch on real quick. One is the Isaac Howard saga. From all accounts, didn't really want to play in Tampa, the Hobey Baker winner, instead going to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Sam O'Reilly, one of the Oilers' top prospects. Real quick, how do you think about how this played out?
It's interesting. I think it's one of those things where we will never truly know all the fine details. It does seem like the Lightning and Isaac did not agree on something. What that is to be determined or to never be known, right?
Yeah.
I think
I will say there were rumors that it was about him maybe not being guaranteed a top 6 spot, which is crazy when you're coming into the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I've read that as well. It's tough to say if that's true, right? Until it comes out of someone's mouth that is part of this transaction, it's speculative, right? But let's say that is true, then I would say I'm glad he's gone, because at a certain point, you got to let the ego go. And I'd rather have guys who are ready to try and win a cup than guys who are trying to guarantee themselves playing time. Kuch is a hard worker, right? He wants to win. You can see it on his face. People misconstrue Kuch's emotions for, him being angry and stuff, but he's really trying to get better, right? And you want guys like that. And I don't want a guy on the team that's going to show up and look at his personal stats all day, right? That's not what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So if that's who he is, look, good riddance. That being said, it probably could have been handled better overall. It just, like, from the fan perspective, it's just so confusing how a guy like this could get away, right? Mm-hmm. So you do wonder where the miscommunication was between the team and Isaac, but again, speculative.
Yeah, you kind of wonder if it's going to be one of those situations where JVB takes the brunt of this, or if it's Cutter Gauthier
right
in Philadelphia and just that level of booze. We'll say really like Sam O'Reilly. I don't think maybe that explosive high end like Isaac Howard had, but I think he's translated to somebody who also is named O'Reilly, Ryan O'Reilly, just sort of that guy who's, maybe not explosive or excels in any one area, but is really, really solid in a lot of different aspects of the game. So I do think the Lightning made out with a prospect, as best of a prospect as they could have had from this situation.
Agreed,
Couple of key subtractions, I would say, Greg. The biggest one, Nick Perbix signing a 2-year deal with the Nashville Predators on July 1st. This is apparently a guy, Barry Trotz, who is just poaching the Tampa Bay roster at this point.
Yeah.
Really wanted to bring. He made made some sort of reference to Perbix maybe not being used the right way in Tampa, which I am sure whatever way he was being used, Greg, is certainly something.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of angles I would take here. I think the first is, let's look at the coaching for the Lightning in this past season for defense, right? They looked awful. Just guys out of position left and right, not just Nick Perbix, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them, they were just consistently not in the right spots, a lot of blown coverages. And anyone who's followed me talk about the Lightning for a long time has seen me point these out in plays, right? And it's very important to understand where these missed opportunities are coming, right? That being said, if you look at Nick Pervix's highlight reel, he is out of position more than anyone on the roster. And he let a lot of goals in the postseason as well. Look, it's a team effort. It's never one guy's fault, but he did make a lot of errors. And I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that maybe he was being used the wrong way. I think that goes back to the coaching again. Like, I kind of view him almost as like a Evan Bouchard type, where his defensive upside is much lower than maybe a real defenseman, but he's got that offensive capability, and I don't deny that at all. But look, the Lightning didn't need that, and that's why he wasn't used that way, right? Like, we don't need him to score goals. So a guy who's out there trying to score goals as a defenseman was not the fit. And I think it's good that he's gone for the Lightning, and it's probably good for Nick Pervix that he's gone as well. He's going to get a better role where he's going, you know?
Yeah. To bring it home to a Lightning, he kind of gave off a little bit of a Marc-Andre Bergeron vibe.
Sure.
Where it's just, I think there's a lot of good offensive tools. I think he was a good puck mover. You know, I think he was like somebody that you could probably put out there on that, if you needed to, that second power play unit just for, you know, sort of quarterback move from the back end.
Sure.
I don't think he was. Obviously, he was the guy that caught most of the fan ire, but you know, I think there's a lot of potential there. Who knows? You know, Andrew Burnett and crew could unlock it in Nashville, kind of make him more of a solid guy. Which, you know, they've done it with a couple players. You know, Jeremy Lauzon mostly on the back end. So, best of luck to Nick Pervix and what he, I guess, will bring to the Nashville Predators.
Yeah, and you know what? I'd like to sneak in something here as well. You know, Nick Pervix gets a ton of hate online. And look, he is a great guy. He does so much for the community and a lot of charity stuff. He's just a great person. And, you know, his personality is not tied to how he played hockey. So let's cool it with the hate on the man, you know?
Agree. No, that's a very good point. Yeah. Good guy overall, Nick Pervix. Greg, I do want to touch on real quick I guess maybe one move you would still like to see from the Lightning this year. Or do you look at this roster and be like, okay, this is as good as we could have get. We're done. Is there still a move out there?
I think there is. I think what we want to see is a big name defenseman added to the Lightning, right? And I think there are sacrifices that need to be made in order to make that happen, given the amount of money remaining, right? I don't think you can just go out and sign a guy right this second. I think it's going to be something that will happen, you know, around the holidays, maybe around the deadline. We'll see where they're at, right? We got to see who gets injured and all these things. There's so many factors. That being said, I do think we need a large name defenseman. And I do also believe that means sacrificing someone that we all love. My best guess, if I had to give you one, would be Nick Paul. I think he's maybe on his way out for trade value. I do think he slightly regressed this past season. I don't think it was significant by any means, but he definitely didn't contribute the way he has in the past couple years. So I think we'll maybe see him on the move for a better defensive piece, but we'll see. I do think no matter what, they do need to add a strong defenseman. I think it's imperative.
Yeah. You mentioned one guy you didn't mention is somebody who's actually been in the subject of trade rumors, and that's Ryan McDonagh. That's actually what we're going to be talking about a little bit on next Monday's show. So this upcoming episode, we're going to dive into some of those Ryan McDonagh trade rumors. But Greg, I'm with you 100%. I look at this roster and I still say defense. That to me is the number one thing that I think is going to kind of be the X factor in how well the Lightning do this year. It sounds like it could be, you know, sort of a hodgepodge back there, especially when it comes to that last pair. There's been a lot of talk, maybe Max Crozier, who had a few games with the Lightning last year and has kind of been a mainstay in Syracuse for the past couple of years. He's somebody that can come up and maybe play a couple different roles. It'll be interesting to see them. But yeah, I mean, that was, I think, to me, kind of one of the things that you looked at last year in that playoff series with Florida and just said that's a spot where the Lightning are getting burned a little bit. Sure. You know, and you especially saw it once once Florida brought in, you know, Seth Jones for some extra depth. You just could kind of see that their bottom pair was just way elite compared to the Lightning's bottom pair. That's
certainly.
Oh yeah. And that's something I think is maybe the biggest thing holding them back. But as you mentioned, that's going to be tough because I don't think they can make a big move without sacrificing somebody. There was talk maybe they were going to take a swing at, Keandre Miller when he was up on the block earlier this year. It's just tough because you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of money to spend. You're kind of committed to this roster at least for one more year in terms of just the flexibility in contract. So it is going to be tough, whatever they do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, like you said, you're committed to this roster for a little bit here. And I think the performance is going to determine Kuch's next signing as well. So we'll see.
Which is kind of a scary thought. But
Terrifying.
Yeah. Well, certainly a lot of off-season stuff to talk about for the Tampa Bay Lightning this year. Hey, this was our first show. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have so much to talk about this year. We're going to be going through some of the Lightning roster as the weeks come on. We're going to be previewing the weeks ahead. We're also going to be checking in with our frenemies. We're going to be having some crossovers with the rest of the Locked On Atlantic Division crew. So stay tuned for that. Plus, any news and notes that pop up, we'll be here bringing it to you. For the meantime, though, that's going to do it for today's Locked On Lightning podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NHL podcast. There's no offseason, but they're still bringing you daily league-wide stories that matter most with local coverage from Locked On. You can find Locked On NHL on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. That's it for today's show. For Greg Stephen, I'm Nick Morgan. We will be back here Monday with an all-new episode of Locked On Lightning. We'll see you then.